Good afternoon, Chairman Gallego and the distinguished members of the subcommittee. Thank you for allowing the Association on American Indian Affairs to testify today. I'm Shannon Keller O'Loughlin, the Executive Director and the Attorney for the Association, and I'm a citizen of the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma. Since its founding in 1922, the Association on American Indian Affairs has been protecting sacred sites all over Indian country. Sacred sites and ceremonial grounds are found everywhere in this nation that we share together. Some are within the exterior boundaries of tribal reservations, but most are located on federal, state, and privately owned lands. Sacred sites include areas commemorating important tribal events and tribal people, much like the Jefferson Memorial, or are burial areas like the Arlington Cemetery or a church cemetery. And other sites are where the presence of our creators live and speak to us, just like your brick and mortar churches. In the first 150 years of U.S. governance, political leaders understood that in order to assimilate and civilize Indian tribes, that you must separate us from our sacred places, from our beliefs, and outlaw our languages and our cultural and religious practices. And you did that. You criminalized our religious and traditional practices and even held back rations if we were caught practicing our dances. The U.S. also allowed its officials and others to take over our homelands, to desecrate burial and ceremonial places, steal our ancestors' remains and their burial belongings, and take important cultural patrimony and sacred objects. Despite more than a century of this religious persecution, we continue our ceremonial lives at sacred sites all over this shared country. And the ability to do so stems from the perseverance of tribes and their citizens, and the federal government's ongoing recognition of its legal and moral responsibilities to protect sacred sites and American Indian religious freedoms. Congress investigated the U.S.'s attack on Indian religious freedom back in 1978 and declared then a policy to protect and preserve our inherent rights of freedom of belief and exercise of religion, including the protection and access to our sacred sites. Since then, the federal government has taken a multitude of actions demonstrating that its federal trust responsibility includes the consideration and protection of sacred sites in federal decision-making. You have passed numerous bipartisan laws. Presidents have issued executive orders. Federal agencies have developed MOUs, reports, action plans, and the courts have recognized that the federal trust responsibility includes consultation with Indian tribes when federal actions threaten sacred sites. The federal government has unquestionably assumed the legal and moral responsibility to protect our sacred sites. Any departure from this policy flies in the face of established political and societal norms and violates our civil and human rights, not to mention our own tribal laws, customs, and traditions. Today, we stand together with the Tohono O'odham Nation and many other tribal nations who aren't here today, who are fighting against this current administration's failure to include our sovereign governments in any action that has the potential to affect our environmental, cultural, and religious rights and freedoms. Since day one of this administration, it has chosen to act unilaterally in Indian affairs and remove even the bare minimum procedures of our government-to-government relationship. We've not only had the ground fall out from beneath us at Standing Rock, at Bears Ears, with BLM land management decisions in Alaska and elsewhere, and at the Tohono O'odham sacred areas at Monument Hill and Organ Pipe. But now the processes under the National Environmental Policy Act are also being threatened by new proposed regulations from the CEQ, further eroding tribal consultation, eliminating cumulative and indirect impacts from environmental review, and taking away our ability to provide less destructive options for development. I'm sure this subcommittee fully understands the devastating statistics in Indian country, our children's suicide rates, our heart disease rates, the numbers of our women, children, and men raped, murdered, and trafficked. Then you must understand how important, how absolutely necessary our cultural and religious practices are to our healing. We cannot recover from centuries of trauma and dispossession unless we can protect and maintain the places where we go to become whole again. The association fully supports Congress in its effort to investigate and cure Indian sacred site destruction and religious freedom violations at the border wall and elsewhere. And I thank you for your time and attention.